right, welcome to our discussion this evening. Before I introduce you to the panel tonight, I'd like you to take a look at some of the statements that have been made regarding that High Court ruling in this past week. That ruling came from the High Court on April the 27th. Let's listen into what a number of various leaders had to say about it.
And now the court says that, no, it's acceptable. You can be a homosexual and you can be a lesbian and not be discriminated against. In other words, you can come out in the open now. It's clear and you are protected.
It's a wrong judgment that was given. I think it was naive because it does not take into consideration the Judeo-Christian tradition that we have inherited as Christians.
If three judges can sit and decide on behalf of the majority of the people of the Kenyan inclination against homosexuality, saying that no, you ought not to bring your biblical and Quranic views about homosexuality, we say it is not the law. They have said actually in the decision, which is here in paragraph 106, your Bible in your Quran does not count. If that is the basis of your objection, sorry, we have refused.
I wish to just remind the judiciary that we're the ones who make the laws of this country. And their job is to interpret the clauses of that law.
The coming in July of the President of the United States of America, Barack Obama, has a suspect relationship with the ruling yesterday because wherever he has visited in the continent of Africa, those countries adopted homosexuality as a precondition to aid and funding.
Okay, so here is my panel tonight. Some you have already seen, one of them you've already seen in that sound clip there. Let me start on my extreme right. We have Irungu Kenyatta, who's Member of Parliament for Kiharu. Is the anti-gay caucus in Parliament still active? It is. Okay.
Yes, indeed, it is.
It is. And so you're here representing that. We also have Harrison Kinyanjui, who's a well-known lawyer in the country. Charles Kanjama, who's here, a lawyer from the Kenya Christian Professionals Forum. Thank you for joining us. Po Kimani is also with us, a social justice activist from Mayibuye, Africa? Yeah. I hope I said that right. And then we have Dr. Njoki Ngumi from The Nest. All of these people you've seen on Checkpoint before and perhaps on this very same issue. So I want to start with you, Charles. What did this ruling mean for you? Everybody's saying this is a backdoor to legalizing homosexuality in this country. Do you believe that?
Yes, it is. It totally is. And beyond that, I think the reality of what this ruling will open up for Kenyans, unless it is reversed on appeal, is something that most Kenyans may not realize because it's what is happening in the Western countries. When you introduce this concept of non-discrimination on the basis of what is really something that is prohibited by Kenyan law, then you will find that it interferes with the rights of all Kenyans to engage in their life without having been forced to change their conduct to accommodate a practice that is clearly against the views of the majority. I think for me the most unfortunate thing is that Kenyans have repeatedly expressed their views on this matter, even at the time of the constitution referendum, and we now see a decision that is being made contrary to the majority views of Kenyans, and it is not, in my view, necessary for interpretation of the Constitution. The Constitution should be interpreted in a spirit that respects fidelity to the majority will of Kenyans when they were passing the Constitution.
Po, does this in any way infringe on the rights of heterosexuals, or shall we say others, who may not be homosexual, intersex, and all of these other groups that we talk about? Do you believe that this infringes on the rights of others, thereby causing all the uproar?
I think it would be important that as Kenyans we also get to read the judgment and tease out the issues that have been raised by the judgment. The most predominant issue in the whole judgment is about sexual orientation. and what that means for any Kenyan. Sexual orientation, not necessarily just homosexuality or bisexuality, but also heterosexuality. So it is a discussion for Kenyans to begin to understand the extent to which sexual orientation is eminent in our deciding what our self-determination looks like, what being Kenyan and being able to express your sexuality, your identity, but also participate in being a Kenyan, being a complete citizen. So for me, the judgment is the beginning of, or the continuation of the conversation that we have been having for a long time on what it means really for us as every Kenyan, whether you're homosexual, heterosexual, or bisexual, what it means that our sexual orientation is as important as our identity, any other identity, be it your race, be it your religion, be it by extension also who you consider yourself to be. Yeah.
Let me pose this question to you, Njoki, and we'll come to the others in a moment. So there's this thing that says it is not African, and in fact you heard in the clip the religious leaders saying this is tied to Obama's coming visit. John Kerry is here, Bill Clinton is here as well. What do you make of this argument that is propped up every time we have this discussion that homosexuality is not African and this is a Western agenda?
I feel like it's a shallow argument. And it's very unthought through, and I don't think it's a worthy argument of us as Kenyans. If, for instance, our honorable MP here were to truly be African, perhaps he should be here wearing skins, you know, maybe he should have come in having beaten a drum, but he's not. He's here wearing a very wonderful suit, probably has a nice phone from elsewhere. So even the idea of what is African can be a little bit convenient based on political agendas and all sorts of other agendas. One of the things that actually is African is the idea of family, is the idea of oneness, is the idea of community. And when we see that a group like the National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission are actually fighting in order for there to be inclusion and for there to not have members of community who are gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgender and intersex and everything else in between, when we fight for these people to not be harassed, to not be blackmailed, to not be raped on the basis of sexual orientation, then we are indeed protecting the family, and that for me is very African.
Harrison?
It's unheard of. I mean, you ask, for instance, the Kikuyu, the Luya, or even the Luo, what you used to call, what do you call, how do you reference homosexuality? It's an African. Let's be real about that. Now, culture is protected in the Constitution, and the tragedy of this decision is that it repudiates what the people chose and elected. One, when the draft of the Constitution were on the drawing board, they had the South African Constitution. In the South African Constitution, we have sexual orientation as a ground of non-discrimination. But when we come to Article 27 of the Kenyan Constitution, what we have is sex, that is male and female, as a ground of non-discrimination. We do not have sexual orientation.
All right, Harrison, allow me to interrupt a little bit, because what they're saying is the gay rights lobby group that they're hoping will be launched is to basically speak for the rights of these individuals, not necessarily
rights,
decriminalizing,
what rights?
but the rights to perhaps not be discriminated against based on their orientation.
But it's a crime. For instance, we have to get rid of Section 162, 163, 164, 165 of our penal code. It is a crime. If rape is a crime, so is homosexuality.
So do they not have any rights?
No, we must.
Because it's a crime?
No, allow me. We must bring a distinction between the rights of everybody as a human being. For instance, our good friends here say they advocate for homosexuality, lesbianism, but above all, they're human beings. So they deserve to be treated with respect as human beings. I'm not going to get a panga and cut them up, because they have the right to life.
That's what they're fighting.
They have the right to life. However, a rapist will not come and sit and tell me that, look, I'm a rapist. I need to be recognized so that I can go and associate. What will they do next?
However,
they will go to schools.
Harrison,
yes,
innocent until proven guilty.
But they have openly said
But they have not been charged in a court of law and found to have gone against the penal code of homosexuality.
If I may come in, the key issue is this. The key issue is this.
We'll come to you, Joki.
If you have an association, for example, of tax evaders, they've not been convicted of tax evasion, but they have taken a label that clearly is contrary to a certain penal provision. That very label, that identifier by itself is acting contrary to the law. So in public policy, what you say is that if our law does not allow you to do certain thing, will not allow you to define yourself by that particular attribute. You can define yourself in any other way, but not by that attribute, because when you do that, you are actually showing contempt for the law. And when you show contempt for the law, you are showing contempt for the Constitution, for the people of Kenya.
I'd just like to point out that consistently when we reference rape, which is, as everybody knows, I'm sure, is non-consensual, we're not
bestiality.
Excuse me, sir.
And bestiality.
Excuse me, sir. We're not really taking into account the large number of consensual same-sex relationships that exist. That is number one. Number two. Number two.
How about
sir, if you will let me finish.
Incest?
If you will let me finish. We're not here to discuss the matter of incest.
No. It's a point.
But you see, the point is,
all right.
We're talking about consent. You're talking about consent.
There are no sexual offenses.
Yes,
they could keep quiet out.
Regardless of consent, defilement.
Okay, one at a time, please.
Regardless of consent.
Okay, all right, Njoki, finish your point, and then we'll have Irungu Kangata just come in.
All right, I'd just like to point out that for the purposes of this discussion, we're talking about the registration of a board that is there to exist to help people to not be killed, to not be raped on the basis of sexual orientation, to not be denied jobs and livelihoods on the basis of sexual orientation, and to not have people be rejected by their families on the basis of sexual orientation. Okay. That is what we're here to discuss. Let us keep to the topic.
That is a question of trying to normalize what is criminal conduct.
Okay.
It's very dangerous.
All right. Irungu, we'll come to you, Pope.
My point, no one has talked about the health implication of same-sex relationships, particularly man-to-man. It is known worldwide that when you try to penetrate a place where it is not supposed to be penetrated, there are some diseases which can occur. For instance, papilloma human virus. We do have herpes zoster. We do have penile cancer. And because what you're trying to do something that is against nature, and where you're trying to go is a place where it is used for excretion. So we do have a lot of germs there. It's a fact.
It's also a family show. So
the
point is, there are grave health issues which come along with same-sex
Some would say there are also grave health issues that come with heterosexual sex. For example, unprotected sex can also lead to the spread of the viruses you're talking about.
We are talking about compared. For instance, what can happen in a heterosexual can happen in a homosexual, all factors being constant.
Right.
But here we are talking about extra diseases which can occur as a result of such kind of
HIV
number
is not
two.
Okay, all right.
Number two. Excuse me. Number two. Number two, the reason why human beings for so many years have been against such kind of a practice is the issue of propagation of human race. Surely, since the time human beings came here, even assume you don't even believe in the Bible, you believe in the so-called the Big Bang, we have been sustained because of procreation. But even without people, a man and a woman having such kind of a relationship, human race cannot be there.
Right.
So therefore, how do you then expect human race, for instance, to propagate itself unless you're talking about cloning? And cloning is illegal.
I want to go back to the point we are talking about the discussion on the judgment
on the
that
ruling.
was made.
Yes.
And that judgment for us as Kenyans brings us to the point where we begin to speak honestly about the existence of a group of people who have come out and said, we have existed, we will continue to exist, and whether or not their legislation against or for us, our lives don't necessarily are not directly linked to you wanting us to exist or not. So for that reason, the three judges who I honor for existing to make that ruling noted that there has been a history of discrimination on presumed and also real or perceived sexual orientation of people.
Okay, so what do you make of the argument, and this is what everybody is talking about, that this is an illegality, that homosexuality is criminal?
In the same judgment.
And in the same one. And We have that on the super wall. If you can just do that, show that up there. The judges also said that they will not base their ruling on religious texts. And everybody said, okay, Kenya is not a secular state. But this is what our constitution says in the preamble, Poe. We, the people of Kenya, it starts by acknowledging the supremacy of the Almighty God of all creation, and lists all the others and says, we, acknowledging the supremacy of the Almighty God, adopt and enact the Constitution for ourselves and future generations. So what do you make of that? In the Constitution, we do mention God, and so therefore some would say that we have all our values based on acknowledgement of God.
Okay, I want to acknowledge that for a long time that has existed, that we acknowledge God and thus in no way also acknowledge any specific religion. We acknowledge the existence of a God. And in that supremacy of our constitution, we also acknowledge that we as a people determine what and where that constitution takes us, which is why we were part of discussing for a long time what our new constitution that was taken on in 2010 looks like. So for me, I think this discussion, as much as we would like to focus on whether or not the discussion can begin or continue to be about morality and people's personal biases and opinions, we need to come alive to the reality that we are living in now, where there was registration of an organization rejected and a judgment has been made. That means that also, for example, in the last 10 years that I have actively worked with the gay and lesbian community of Kenya, I know that in those 10 years, the steps made have been incremental to make sure people understand and society begins to tease out the issues.
Okay.
What are we discomfortable about? What are we uncomfortable about?
Right.
What is this that is so scared?
All right, let's talk about what we're uncomfortable about. The issue of God, and I'd like, Njoki, perhaps for you to take a look at this, and we acknowledge the supremacy of God. Some would say then all our value system is based on that acknowledgement, which is the first in the Constitution. And like they have said, this is ungodly, regardless of what God you believe in, whether it's Allah, Jesus or whoever. What do you say to that?
I mean, it's also been said that it's ungodly to have non-propagating relationships, which I think maybe all the couples who are struggling with infertility would have a problem with, because it's not necessary that you have children in order to prove your worth in a society. And as Africans, we know this. Like as where we've come from, we know this. We also need to realize that the Christianity that we inherited was the Christianity that was used to subjugate Africans during the colonial time. And so even the people who are practicing Christianity now are coming to terms with that and starting to understand who they are as Africans in the context of this sort of Christianity that they either find themselves raised into or came into contact with when they were in school. Not all Kenyans also believe these things. Right. So we need to have room. We need to just give one another room. The other thing in the acknowledgement of a supreme being, I think, would also be implicit the acknowledgement that no human being deserves to be killed by another, deserves to be raped by another on any basis, deserves to be discriminated against by another, and that is what this judgment is about.
All right, Charles, what would you say to people, and Harrison, both of you can weigh in on this one, that Christianity is in itself an-African?
The first thing I would say is that first of all, culture keeps evolving. Christianity has come into our society, and it has enriched and purified our African culture, so that in our African continent right now, majority, more than 90%, maybe 95%, are either Christian or Muslim. So it is not possible for the religion of the majority of the Africans to be an African.
So Christianity came and enriched our existing cultures and purified it?
Yes.
Okay, so Harrison, what of people who say, well, this is the same thing? Homosexuality could come and enrich and purify our existing cultures.
We must hold some values to be above those transient, notions. Njoki draws her cultural underpinnings among the Kikuyu. The Kikuyu had nothing about homosexuality. It was known as Mogiro. If you were caught involved in homosexuality, you were put in, something, and you rolled down the river, and you died. Basically, the Kikuyu saw in terms of their culture, and this is protected in Article 44, sub-Article 2, I must state. And also, if you read Article 45, it protects the natural family It's a natural order that the state is enjoined to protect. Now, if we do have lesbians and homosexuals who are now supposed to form an association, what next do you expect? One, because of their small size, they will want to expand. So they will want to go to your schools, your girls' boarding schools, your boys' boarding schools, your mixed schools, and say, they are the homosexual and lesbian association. What will they want to do? Glamorize it, and therefore add to their numbers. That's the next step. And the next step is they're going to try and knock off, and thank God for people like Mheshimiwa right here, through Parliament, Section 162, 163, 164, and 165. However, they cannot run away from the fact that the majority of the Kenyan people abhor these practices. They are redundant practices. They are not natural. And like he was trying to show, that you're going the exit path. So surely, if you saw me on the road driving backwards and I'm actually going the right way, you would have a question about me. Okay. That's not natural. That's not the proper way to do it. But you want acceptance. You want the traffic laws to be changed so that they accept you. I think the majority would say there's something wrong with you, and you better, find a way of being like us. Or, I mean, it's a crime right now. It is a crime. So what I in African practices is this. If you are to take again for Njoki's sake, the Kikuyu, the practices of the Kikuyu so much mirror what is actually in the Bible. For instance, about sacrifices, even the Levitical laws. For instance, Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13, which says that it is wrong for you to have a man lie with another man.
Okay, Harrison, I'd like us to move to Irungu, but even as you talk about history, in African history, there's a group in northern Uganda called the Mudokodako, who are effeminate males in the Langi community who were allowed to marry men. There's the Shangaan of Southern Africa, who had a name for a male wife. In Wolof language in Senegal, references to homosexual men, they were called the Gordigan. They're just, for as many examples there are of homosexuality being against African culture, there's other examples that, suggest otherwise.
Isolated cases.
These are isolated.
Again,
all right,
2 points.
Yes.
Number one, we must distinguish the homosexuality and what we used to call African man-to-man or woman-to-woman marriages. Because, for instance, in Kikuyu, we used to have that, but it was not sexual per se.
Right.
It was a situation where a woman who doesn't have children would marry another woman, and that woman would get children with other men. So therefore, what has been happening, the so-called apologists who support this movement have been taking those instances and try to twist them to show as if those were relationships between a woman and a woman, but they were not. It was a situation of convenience to get children. That's number one. Number two, the main problem with this judgment, it may open up a Pandora box for other groups, which may as well come and say, no, we need to be given the right of association. For instance, Mongeke, by the way, they have the right, by the way, when they look at this thing, to say, no, we have the right to form ourselves, start championing our issues, including people like Chinkororo, including, by the way, Al-Shabaab. Because the argument has been here in this judgment, you have the right to associate. Okay. Notwithstanding whether your idea is supported by the majority or not.
Or not. So whether it's criminal or not.
Yes. To me, the issue is that the way the Constitution was interpreted by the judge may, strictly speaking, open up a Pandora box. Number two, finally, a final point. We are also having a situation where Kenyans feel as if the elected leaders, they don't have powers to show them the direction of society. If such a very radical issue has been brought up by a court, which is not elected, it does not have legitimacy of the people. It means
but are you saying judges don't have the legitimacy of the people?
Of course, when you talk about legitimacy, it comes through a vote. You vote so that you do something that I want to do.
I think I would say it's not legit. It's not that they lack legitimacy.
Right.
They have legitimacy, delegated and limited authority of judgment, parliament of lawmaking, and the executive of governance in another way. I think for me, I want to make 2 key points. First is to clarify what Mheshimiwa said, that in a system of separation of powers, it is important that each arm of government recognizes it's exercising delegated and limited authority. And it should not go beyond the marks that have been established in the Constitution for what they ought to do. But more importantly, and this is a legal critique of the judgment that I hope will be made eventually when the matter is goes on appeal, as I expect it will, is that there is a danger in constitutional jurisprudence of judges not recognizing the uniqueness of the Kenyan Constitution and recognizing that the Kenyan Constitution is a product that has been passed by Kenyans to be relevant for our country. It is our law. And the Supreme Court in one case actually noted the danger of judges speaking left, right, and center from decisions of other countries that are based on other constitutions and other cultures and not recognizing what the Kenyan Constitution requires. And for me, I feel this is really what happened in this judgment.
All right, Njoki.
I'd just like to reference what my learned friend said about being able to put somebody in a basin and roll them down the hill until they die. I'd like to know if you're then stating that these parts of culture are protected by the same constitution.
No, I didn't mean
and
that.
let me finish because I let you finish. And so we should still be doing these things because culture is protected by the Constitution. Again, when we talk about Kikuyu culture, as Charles said, culture is ever evolving. Kikuyus are not circumcising their women, for instance, as much as they used to, if at all. There are very many places you will go where there are Kikuyus who exist who are not circumcising women, and that culture, in that sense, also was able to evolve. I'd just like to mention that our very Attorney General was at the 21st Universal Periodic Review, where we were kind of assessing where Kenya is as regards human rights. And he talked about progress being made in Kenya about for letting there be social consensus built for the acceptance of gay and lesbian people. This was said by our very AG when he was talking about the landmark case where Audrey was able to have the state recognize her change of gender. And so these things, while they may not have been accepted some time ago, are being accepted right now. That was also a legal judgment. It was a landmark one. And so we just need to find a way in which we can find consensus instead of just kind of sitting on opposite sides and arguing.
We already have consensus.
And instead of doing this, we need to realize that people exist. They have always existed and will continue to exist. This idea of isolated cases, you will find if you do your research properly, it's not true. They're not isolated at all.
We cannot use a judgment of, like Mheshimiwa say, a 3-judge bench to actually, in my view, with tremendous respect to them, push down the throat of Kenyans something so abhorrent that the majority, if it were to be put to vote, and you, the Kenyan viewer, the person who's out there, would you vote for it? Would you say that, yes, we want homosexuality? I believe that by the rejection of sexual orientation as a ground of non-discrimination in Article 27(4) by the majority of the Kenyan people during the referendum was in itself a deliberate act of the committee of the experts to ensure that at least the Constitution did not breach on the majority of the Kenyans' belief.
Beyond that, even the opinion polls and surveys have shown not a majority, not a vast majority, a super majority of about 98% of Kenyans
And I
are
want to
opposed to this particular agenda. So how do you get?
Let's have Pauline, please.
Now I would also like to respond because it is important that as much as we want to deny, as much as we want to run away from the issue, we look at what we are saying. If really Kenya does not have gays and lesbians, there would not be a discussion, a representation, and even an attempt to register. That conversation would not be happening because then there would be nobody to speak for those gays and lesbians who are Kenyans who don't exist.
The reality.
And above that, second point, above that, for 10 years, publicly, the gay and lesbian community has existed, has represented itself, and has also given people, the Kenyan people who they are part of, space and time to have a discussion about what it really means to understand what sexual orientation means beyond heterosexuality. So we can continue to sit here and claim that as Kenyans, as Africans, this is an African ungodly and all those words we are using, but we will be running away or burying our heads in the sand.
All right, Paul, let me just ask this before Irungu weighs in on that. So now that this ruling, and we'll talk about the AG's intent to appeal that ruling, but what's next? Will we be looking towards decriminalizing homosexuality in the country? Is that something you see for the future?
I am very hopeful that this begins that conversation I am talking about, where gays and lesbians in Kenya can participate publicly, fully, in public life. And what that means is that you can access public health, you can go to school, you can get employment, you can be protected from discrimination that, like Njoki says, you will not be raped because people assume, presume, or know your sexual orientation.
But over and about that, they want to recruit. They want to hold gay prides. They want to go out there in public. They want to have their churches.
Is that a fact?
No,
they want to recruit.
What we have seen.
Do you have proof of that?
What we have seen.
Do you have proof of that?
Let me break it down.
Please.
What we have seen is the voices from the West. The voices and the practices from the West, especially from North America, is that this is exactly what they're doing, and they are forcing people that, look, you better accept us. If you do not accept us, we will include your actions of discrimination among hate speech. That's where they're headed. And they're going to say, we need also to be recognized in the marriage institution. And what are they going to say? Well, we may not have equal rights as you do, but we also want to adopt children. But they are in redundant relationships. They are unable by themselves in their sexual acts to reproduce. So what will they come for? Your children, you heterosexuals. And what will they do? They want to go to schools and say that this is a practice that we want also educated in these children to form part of the teaching curriculum.
Let's have
is that where we want to go?
No. Well, the point is, you must be a very good historian when you're looking at this thing. What you're saying, it is true. You're looking at what has been happening in the West, and we are seeing that it's going to be replicated here in Africa.
So you find the ruling and everything that's happening, Obama's arrival, not a coincidence?
To me, it is neither here or there. To me, what I'm seeing a jurisprudence that is coming out of our courts, which is not really deep jurisprudentially. That's number one. Number two, and to me, I think that's a very important issue, is the issue which she's talking about as to whether we do have gays and why are we talking about them whereas they are still there. The point is, in every society, we shall always have people who are doing bad things. And the fact that we do have people doing bad things does not mean we then recognize that. That's number one. Number two, they talk about that this is a consensual act. And Daktari has not responded to that point. In our penal code, we have so many consensual, so-called victimless crime, which are still crime in our law. A good example. Look here. One, bestiality. Two, we have
bestiality isn't consensual, surely.
No, the point is,
no, I'm just use another example. I know where you're going, but there is no way bestiality is consensual. No, you don't know whether the animal consents. But I see what you're trying to say.
We do have incest, for instance.
Okay,
where is it that incest
let Njoki respond.
Illegal?
Very quickly, we're running out of time.
What about suicide? Where is it that I should be told not to kill myself? I find a point. I find a point.
And then Njoki can respond.
Me personally, I would have no problem if that issue was coming through voters. In the America, for instance, they have started to legalize some drugs through referendum. So I would urge them, if they were to agitate, they convince Kenyans, the way I have seen some drugs being legalized in various states in America, I would have no problem.
Let's let Njoki respond to that, because there's also, like he said, victimless crimes, some would say. Corruption is one. Willing buyer, willing seller.
Is corruption really a victimless crime?
No, not victimless, but both of them, it's consensual, if you like. I offer you a bribe, you accept the bribe. But that doesn't make it right necessarily.
Yeah, especially not in the sense where it kind of enhances the brokenness of a system with regards to service provision. Right. While we are talking about places in which we were not adding up, I'd like to point out that Mheshimiwa, when he talked about diseases in particular, of every single one of the diseases that he mentioned, whether it was herpes zoster, whether it was human papilloma virus, whether it was anal warts, whether it was whatever, penile cancer, can also all be found among heterosexual people. That is for one. For two, we're really in a situation where we are here to argue for the right of people to exist, and to exist without being harassed, without being killed, without being negatively treated by society. That is what the NGO board is talking about, and that is what the ruling is about. With regard to the ruling in particular, it was talking about the need for people to associate freely, and we wouldn't have the Kenya that we have now if we were not a multi-party state, and that was not necessarily just a decision that came that
Right,
came from.
I hear you. It was minority to begin with until
Yes.
it garnered support.
Yes.
Paul,
And the reason, and let me finish. The reason that we need to amass social consensus, and it begins with conversations like this, where we actually listen and not just throw stones at one another. It begins with conversations like this, and we need to have these conversations in our homes and in the places where we are, where it comes to the point that if somebody is different from you, do you reserve the right, because you are the majority, to treat them badly?
Okay.
That's what the National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission are here to counter. Nothing else.
Okay. Paul, as you conclude, this is an argument that many pose and say, so what happens if this setting precedent, if drug dealers tomorrow say, well, you know, we want to form, you know, a rights lobby group. Yes, it's illegal under the Constitution, but, you know, there's certain rights that we feel because of perceived you know, the perception that we may be drug dealers, even though we're not. But, you know, we want to form a lobby group, because many are saying that's essentially what it is, legalizing an illegality.
As I started out, I would like us to also really take time to read this judgment, because it teases out the issues that we are struggling with as a state. It begins to address issues of freedom of association. In association, like you say, a lot of people are struggling to belong to some place. And I won't sit here and say who can and who cannot, but I will sit here and say that that Constitution gives us the possibility to continue to want to understand, to empathize with what being Kenyan and being different and being something other than what
drug
is
dealers are also Kenyans.
Yeah, and
Murderers
drug dealers
are
are no
Kenyan.
less human beings than you and me. And the fact that they are human beings calls on each one of us to seek for dignity for each one of the human beings. I think also we need to consistently remember that our values, our personal opinions remain just that, our personal opinions. When we want to build a consensus, when we are building a state, it requires me and you and each one of you to sit together and see what is that, like I am saying, what is that makes you so uncomfortable that it begins to give you ideas and demons you chase after. Like I have heard you say that gays want to get married and to claim for. I won't sit here and talk for gays and lesbians of Kenya, but I also haven't had any gay and lesbian sit here and say that they're claiming marriage and all those things you've claimed.
Okay.
So for us is to stay away from the judgment.
Right.
Begin to understand and empathize with the situation to build the Kenya we are looking for. A Kenya that's not dying of corruption and of ills, but a Kenya that's actually alive to the reality that we are living in. And that's a Kenya we all want.
Okay. Charles, very quickly as we conclude.
I teach criminal law, criminology, policing. This past week, the economic survey was released, and one of the chapters is on governance. It lists numerous crimes that Kenyans commit. Crimes are committed in every country. Strategies in criminology, you study about how to avoid crime, to reduce crime, to punish criminals, and so on. It is not something new that society finds malcontents or people who engage in what is called deviant behavior. The important thing is that society must be able to educate and be firm on what will be allowed and what will not be allowed, because it is harmful to society. And once society makes its determination, as Kenyans did on 4th of August 2010 when they passed the new constitution, then we must teach respect for the law.
Okay.
And if there is no respect for the law, there's no respect for the rule of law, or if we allow a change of the law without consulting that very majority that gave the constitution the force that it has, then we are creating anarchy. So I think it is unfortunate that we have this situation where majority of Kenyans, vast majority, believe
I really need to cut you off. Yes, because
so
of time.
I will just finish by saying that it is our hope that as the matters go through the judicial process, that our judges will try to interpret the Constitution the way the Kenyans intended when they were passing the Constitution.
Okay, great. Harrison and then Irungu, very quickly.
Okay.
If you can do it in a minute, I'd be happy.
Thank you. Now, Kenyans, the majority of you do not support these practices called homosexuality and lesbianism. Do something that you've never done before. If you've never written to your member of parliament or the senator, write to them, tell them, give them your opinion, let them know that you're actually against this practice. Let it go to the legal department, let them know that this is the legal position and this is it. However, when they say that they have rights, they should know that there are limitations. I am not free to express myself fully without recognizing that I have a neighbor, and that neighbor also has a restriction
Okay.
to the point that they can go to. So this is a decision made by 3 people. We all due respect to them. I hope the Court of Appeal does overturn it. And if they go to the Supreme Court, then we will fight also there. But
right.
the Kenyan people should
Time,
know
please.
you have a responsibility.
Yes,
Let
and
it be
hopefully
known.
not to do things they've never done before. That's a little scary. That's a little scary. Yeah, you know.
Not a crime.
All right,
Not a crime.
Irongo,
Yes,
very
two issues
quickly,
only.
less than,
Yes.
not 2, please, 1.
No, 2 issues.
One, please.
Fine. To me, I would like Kenyans to read more as to the social ills which come as a result of legalization of gayism and the same-sex relationships, particularly, and I want particular issues to do with 1, issues to do with drug abuse, 2, issues to do with various diseases which I have mentioned, which all factors being constant don't apply to heterosexuals, unlike what Dr. Ria said. And finally, we do have several victimless crimes in our penal code. If you do away with gayism, if you say gayism is right, then I don't see why incest is still illegal. I don't see why bestiality is still illegal. I don't see.
All right. Okay. Yes, we really are out of time, even though we could talk about this for a long time. And I do think this is a national conversation that we need to have, seeing as, you know, a high court made this ruling. We wait to see what happens with the AG and his attempt to appeal this. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us tonight. That is our discussion.